Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. Now, between us, Rob and I have got a reasonable amount of experience in the old property game, but we're being completely outdone this week. We've got a true legend of the game that is so good at property, he's been able to retire.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday property investors come to be informed and inspired. And there's so much to be inspired by in this week's episode. We so often hear from people who are along the journey, but our guest this week is already there. So what's it like to achieve your goals? We'll find out in just a minute.
So, a big news story for property investors and landlords this week. The government rejects the renewal of the Liverpool citywide licensing scheme. Now, this is about Liverpool, but Rob, you've got a passion for all things licensing and detail like that, so I'll hold back and let you take this one.
Well, I did get weirdly excited by this story. I posted it in our company Slack channel during the week and said it was huge news, which I think was really stretching the definition of huge, because most people are not going to care about this at all. But if you are a bit of a geek when it comes to this kind of thing, it is kind of big news because councils love introducing licensing schemes, and this is a setback. Liverpool City Council was one of the first to introduce licensing citywide, and at the time that they did it, which is nearly 5 years ago, they could just do that without having to get permission from the national government. However, because others followed in their footsteps and it was controversial to introduce this citywide when really it was only intended to be using in specific areas where it was necessary, they then introduced a rule where cities had to get permission from the national government to introduce it on a citywide basis, which is why Liverpool has had to apply to have this scheme extended at the end of its initial 5-year run. And that request has been turned down. So as it stands, this licensing scheme, which was controversial when it came in, hated by landlords, seems like it might be going away, although Liverpool Council can still appeal. So I would definitely class this as positive news. Not saying that there's never a need for licensing, but it seems to me to make far more sense to focus it on areas where standards are known to be low and it needs particular focus. That way you've actually got more chance of policing it anyway, which is what selective licensing was intended to be. Broadening it out to an entire city doesn't make sense to me. So this will definitely make other city councils think twice before doing something similar. Might mean other schemes fail to get renewed as well. So good news all round.
Yes, we made Liverpool our number one 2020 hotspot. And if you don't remember that, we'll go back a few episodes, or you can watch our YouTube video. We put a YouTube video out very recently with our 2020 hotspots. Have a watch that video, have a listen to the podcast, maybe do both. But if you head over to YouTube, make sure you subscribe because there's loads of videos coming out all the time now. We're really upping our YouTube game and giving you even more education goodness. So make sure you take advantage of that as well.
For many people, the end game of property is being able to retire. Be able to replace your income with property, quit your job and spend your time doing whatever you want to do. There are a lot of people in the Property Hub community pursuing that goal, but what's it actually like when you get there? Well, today we hear from somebody who's done exactly that. And as you'll hear, the experience of hitting that goal isn't necessarily how you'd think it would be. So Rob B caught up with Mark Morris. He's been a long-term friend of the Property Hub. He's run events for us. He's contributed to a couple of our books, and he's been investing for the best part of a couple of decades. Success in property didn't happen overnight for Mark, but over the years, he got to a point where he was starting to make really good money. And even though he enjoyed the work that he was doing in IT, he reached a point where he could retire, and eventually he did. We'll hear all about what that experience of retiring was like for Mark. But first, Rob went all the way back to hear about the beginnings of his property journey.
So Mark, you've been investing for a long time, but we all have to start from somewhere. But where did the concept or even the idea of property investment even come to you? Where did you get that awareness from? Because it's not something you do randomly one day. You have your cornflakes and go, oh, you know what, today I'm going to be a property investor. So how did you become aware of even the concept of property investment? And then what steps did you take to start your journey?
I think it all started, my mother and father, when I was probably 10, 11 years old, they got some inheritance and my dad bought a property in the Lake District. He bought it for us to use, but also to rent out as a holiday let. And he bought that and it went well, and he bought 3 or 4 more properties. So we had a small portfolio.
And back then, that wasn't the norm, was it? People didn't invest property.
And I think I really understood then that things were going well. Very shortly afterwards, he was a lecturer, he retired, and I could see that they were having a comfortable retirement on a portfolio of properties. And I think that sowed the seed for me, really, that property was a good vehicle.
So then you became an adult yourself and eventually an investor. So what was your first investment?
I didn't invest until I was about 30 years old. I bought my own property quite young, but there was always kind of month left at the end of the money, and I never really managed to get a pot together to save to invest. I was in IT, I took on a freelance role, and the rate was good, and I started realising that there was some money left at the end of the month, and before long I had a reasonable sized pot, and I decided to invest locally in a flat. Buy-to-let mortgages were just in its infancy, so I bought 2 properties using my pot. The thing I probably did wrong then was that I actually, because I didn't believe I needed any cash flow, I actually bought them as repayment mortgages and had them over 10 years. So effectively, they just paid for themselves, which at the time was fine because I didn't need the money. But later on, I found that when I'd actually lost my contract, Y2K came, people were getting laid off, and I actually found that I really could have done with some cash flow. And I think then that was kind of when the seed was sown that I needed to, if I wanted to carry on in freelancing, and there were going to be occasions where I might be out of work for 2 or 3 months, because so many people had gone back into permanent employment, they'd had their fingers burnt, oh no, I can't hack this being out of work. I just thought I need to create some cash flow to tide me over. So
it's interesting that pain taught you a lesson.
By that time as well, I was married to Karen. We had our own house, and I had bills to pay, and it was quite a tough time. And that was the real driving factor to start producing cash flow to enable me. Because when you're in a freelance role, it's good, the rates are good, but there's peaks and troughs like anything. So I needed that vehicle to enable me to be out for periods of time. So from then, it was really just a case of building up pots of cash. I think because I'd had issues, not with the mortgages as such, but because I didn't want to create too much in terms of expensive mortgage payments. I was just building cash pots and buying properties cash, because in those days, early 2000s, I was picking up properties sort of 30, 40k.
And these were still local to you?
All around sort of Salford area. By the time of 2006, 2007, I'd probably built up around 6, 7, 8 properties, which I was managing myself. And then sadly, mainly because I wasn't educated really, I made a couple of poor purchases right at the top of the market, which quickly, went into negative equity. Again, that was another painful experience, but again, they're all learning curves.
I can share that one with you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that, in hindsight, wish they knew the 18-year property cycle. And I think, again, if I'd have known things like that, those 2 purchases that, again, could have wiped me out, wouldn't have been made. So, yeah.
It's interesting, though, but once again, some pain and event has caused you to take stock, learn, and then adapt. Did you do something different then?
Yeah, so, again, after that, I didn't have particularly huge amounts of cash, which I wish I had done, because I knew investors that were kind of cleaning up, picking up properties for next to nothing compared to what the pre-2007 prices were. I was still building pots. I was still freelance. I started looking at other markets, and I came across the American market in the Midwest. The American market slumped even further than the UK. People were just handing back keys, and properties were just going for unbelievable prices. I started picking up properties in Michigan around sort of 12, 15k mark, and they were really cash flowing well.
And when you say cash flowing well, what were your returns?
So within about the first 2 years, I probably bought 4 Michigan properties ranging from about 12 to 15k US dollars. They were cash flowing between 650 US to 850 US.
An incredible return.
Yes, the yields were just were fantastic. Thankfully, with doing a bit of research, I got a good property manager, but there were a lot of maintenance issues. The properties weren't in the best of condition, but over the portfolio, they've all done really well.
So far, you've built up properties local to you. You've purchased a couple of investments at the top of the market, which you regretted. And now you've pivoted again and you're looking at American properties. You're getting a great yield from those.
Yeah.
What happened?
I think it was around 2013. I was on holiday, and I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I would class myself as, before that, not having much in the way of I had no education really, only the education that I'd got from experience through sort of yields and seeing my mother and father, how they'd fared. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and then I came across the property podcast, which I quickly got hooked on. I think we were just saying before, I remember Rick, the American.
The guy who introduced it. This is where the story goes wrong now, isn't it?
No, quite
Listen to the property podcast and it all went downhill.
No, quite the opposite. So I started listening to the property podcast. I started really understanding from you guys the importance of education, just fundamentals really. And I could hear myself when I was listening to the podcast saying, I wish I'd have known this 5-10 years ago. So yeah, I just started consuming as many podcasts, going on forums, reading books. I'm not a prolific reader, but I did start reading books, Audible, things like that, and just really started getting educated. And really, my property investment just increased rapidly after being educated. I think after I started getting educated, within the next sort of 3 to 4 years, I think I'd bought in the US and the UK around 18 properties. So those 3-4 years, I produced more income property-wise than probably the 12 years previous.
How many properties were you roughly at before?
I would say probably about maybe 12, something like that.
And then you added another 18?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. So what changed? Obviously, education is great, but you had to implement something. So what did you implement or change that you hadn't done before?
I think the main thing that I really understood was leverage. But when I started getting educated and understanding leverage, understanding good and bad debt, I had no issue with having debt as long as it was good debt. So I was using mortgages to leverage and just speed up my purchasing process.
So you've learned a lot, which is amazing, and you've adapted by the education that you've consumed, and it's great that you've actually taken action on it. What happened next? You've built a sizable portfolio. You've done a lot of different things. As your portfolio's developed, what are you doing now?
When I was developing my portfolio, I actually kind of pivoted from private lets to LHA tenants, benefit tenants. The LHA rate was really good in Salford, and what I found was that I actually, in some circumstances, I could get a better return than private lets. Also, I'd built up a very strong relationship with the council. I was able to access the right tenants from the council. They had a bond scheme. They had grants. So I was picking a lot of good things from the council. I also, again, through education, started understanding some additional strategies, LHA advanced strategies that you could do, whereas operating extra rooms as bedrooms, getting higher rates, things like that. There's a lot of tweaks that you can do in LHA and Universal Credit, which enables you to get the maximum rental yield. Really, for the next 4 or 5 years, up until about 2 years ago, that was my main focus, really building up a decent-sized portfolio in the UK and the US in terms of high rental yields.
So you've built up a significant sum of money, but you've mentioned self-management, so I can imagine a significant amount of work as well.
Yeah, so probably back in 2013, I was burning myself out. I was trying to manage properties as well as having a freelance role, as well as doing books and everything else that goes with management. I then realised that, again, through listening to podcasts, I needed to start outsourcing. So I outsourced all my new properties to an agent. I had to go through a couple of bad agents to begin with, but found a good agent. So quite quickly, I got over that management issue, which enabled me to increase my investment, because that was definitely holding me back. Just outsourcing tasks somebody else could do better.
So you're still working? You've still got a job at this point?
No, in May last year, I'd been on about a 2 or 3 year IT contract. That came to an end, so I kind of decided it was time to take a break. I was 50 last year, and my property income had surpassed my IT role, so I just really wanted to take time out and decide what I wanted to do. So at the moment, I'm kind of at a bit of a crossroads, I think it's fair to say.
So effectively, you retired.
Retirement feels a little bit
Permanent.
Yeah.
But you've got the position where you've got the choice.
Yes,
well,
definitely.
Congratulations. You know,
Cheers,
there's going to be a lot of people listening to this who want to get into that position. And I'm actually kind of fascinated about that journey. It's a personal fascination of mine. I don't know if it's one of my goals. I'm sure I'd like to stop at one point, but it also terrifies me because I love being busy and work, and I've got a busy brain and it needs to be kept occupied. So talk to me about leading up to retirement and the feeling of knowing you're nearly there, you've nearly done it. Do you remember how you felt?
Well, I think I've always realised that the journey, setting goals, and the journey, one of my goals was to retire sort of before I was 50, but the goal, the journey was kind of far better than the finishing line, because when I actually got there, I realised within a couple of months that, I mean, it was my 50th, so we went on a nice holiday, things with friends, there's quite a lot going on, but then after that, I felt quite lost.
But before that, did you anticipate that? Because you're going through the journey, and the journey hasn't been smooth sailing, and it has been tough. And most people think, right, if I slog through this journey, I'll get to this end goal. And your goal was to retire at 50, which amazingly, you achieved, which is incredible. But while you were partaking in that journey, did you manage to appreciate the process as much as you do now?
It's hard, but I think, like you say, you've always got things going on. You always know that you're moving forwards to a goal at the end. I think part of my problem was that I was so focused on the goals to get to the end. I didn't really do any planning as what I'm going to do when I get there. After the first 2 months, I was quite lost because I really didn't. I just focused so much on getting there. Whereas afterwards, I like doing a lot of walking, like playing tennis, I like going to the gym, but there's only so much of that you can do. And again, I like to be busy. I'm definitely a doer, so I realised that probably a little bit more planning on what was going to happen after you achieve the goal would have been preferential, really.
What I'm curious about is that almost that final 12 months, and you're going through the journey, the process, you're in a different place then, because you can be in a journey where you're miles away from your goal. And some people will enjoy that journey and some people won't. But then you've got the latter part of your journey towards a goal where you're close, and you can almost draw from some of the success already because you're getting close to that goal, and also probably appreciate the journey as well. And what were the emotions as you got closer to your end goal?
Well, from my point of view, my goal was never to property to necessarily become my day job, give up work, because I did genuinely enjoy the contracting role. So 2 years ago, I probably hit the stage where I knew, I could, but my mindset was that I wanted to carry on. When I actually got to that stage where I had kind of replaced my sort of freelance income, things just, you do kind of realise that, well, you start taking things a little less seriously. Things, I'm not saying don't become important, but you don't get too wound up about things because well, if things do go wrong, you've built up a sort of portfolio to enable you to see you through. So it's a bit of a strange one because I didn't get to that last May and think, one day on the Friday, right, I've done it, on the Monday I'm leaving. I did have that little buffer, which I quite liked. I mean, in some ways, the May date was enforced on me because my contract ended, and then it was just, right, okay, this is a good time to take a break, take stock.
I think it's really, you touched on something there that I think it's really important, that you got to a position of financial freedom, but you chose to work for 2 more years. And you can be doing, the same sort of role, but just having that knowledge that if you don't want to do it, you can stop. I think it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's having that choice, isn't it? And if you think, one day you go in and things, you just think, it's too much, I don't need this, then yeah, you can decide to walk away. I know that is a lot of people's goal, but I just knew that if I did need to leave work, I could carry on.
And I think it is a lot of people's goal. So I want to talk about what happens next, because a lot of people think they want to retire, and maybe they do, but I think it's such a universal goal that people want to do, that I want to talk about how you felt, not initially, because you had the birthday, you had events, you had things planned for the first couple of months, as you said. But as those things passed and the excitement of the goals hit, where did you go next, sort of mentally? How did you feel about kind of stopping and not having to run around, do everything, not having to go into work to do a role? How did you feel?
There's pros and cons. I mean, I get up in the morning and I can have a coffee and I don't have to. Whereas before, I used to get up in the morning and literally within 15 minutes, I was running for the train. So there is that. Before I finished work, you'd go to the gym thinking you had an hour, and then you have a phone call, and before you know it, you've only got half an hour. So you obviously have a lot more time on your hands. I think the real issue for me is that because I had a lot of time on my hands, I started becoming quite lazy and complacent. I think it's only now that I've really understood that quote, where it says, if you want something doing, ask a busy person. Yeah. Because I think I got to the stage where things had come up that needed me to make a decision, and I just wasn't making decisions because I was just so used to doing nothing. And also I'd get quite irritated when property issues came up, and I found that quite worrying because I always prided myself on any issues that came up, I'd be on it straight away, or that day, or within 24 hours. I mean, I've heard people say, yeah, your mojo goes, and I kind of understand that.
It's amazing how quickly that happened, though, because you say it was only May last year, yeah. So it's not even a year.
I'd say within 3 months, I started really finding myself, as I say, getting complacent. You have to get into a routine. It doesn't matter if it's only a couple of hours a day, but you need to get into a routine every day.
What is it like having people your own age peers still working and you've stopped? Is it ever something you've ever noticed, ever bothered you, or you want to do stuff and everyone else is still doing a 9 to 5?
You've hit the nail on the head there, because people are just not there. Friends, you see them occasionally in the evening, but yeah, you can't really do the kind of one-to-one stuff because they are all still working.
You've already said that you should have set a goal beyond a goal. If you went back to become financially free again, you'd have another goal ready and waiting to then go on to next. Is there anything else you'd do or change or adapt, preparing yourself for financial freedom?
It's planning, really. You need to plan what you're going to do. Everybody has hobbies, but a day is quite a long time to fill. In hindsight, I probably wish I'd have thought about more what I was going to do. Was I going to do a tutor role? Was I going to do a different type of investment? I mean, a lot of people go from buy-to-lets to HMOs to developments. I've never done that. I've just kind of repeated, and probably kind of stuck probably too long. But now I'm kind of at that age where I'm thinking, well, do I need to go on to that next level, if that makes sense? So trying to really decide far earlier, what you plan to do afterwards. And it may be that you just want to do a couple of days, or you want to just do something different, but try and start researching that. And I think the other thing that I found is that I wanted to do something maybe for a couple of days, 2-3 days, but actually that's a lot sort of easier said than done. I mean, the other thing to say is that from my point of view, my youngest daughter's still at secondary school, so Chloe is our focus. My eldest, Hannah, is just starting apprentice. So it's not as though you can kind of walk off into the sunset.
So what is next? What are your plans?
I mean, the thing is, I'm still really motivated by property. So I do want to do something else, whether it's for myself or whether it's freelance. So maybe get a little bit more involved in property, maybe helping. I mean, I'd just love to help others, really. How that can come about, I'm not really sure yet, but yeah, I'm looking forward to a new challenge. I'm still motivated, and I think I've realised that I'm not going to be putting my feet up for the rest of my time.
A huge thank you to Mark. I really enjoyed that interview. Mark's just a great guy, but the experience that he has and the lessons that we can take from Mark's journey are incredible. And one of the big ones that's clear, and I hope you've all picked up, is the importance of having a goal, knowing where you're going next. It's often talked about that the journey is more important than the destination. I know it sounds a bit cheesy and a bit of a cliche, but it's so true. And that's why it's important to do what you love, because that's the journey. But also, if you hit your goals, that's not it. Don't stop, because you need that next thing and that next thing. Life is about growth and learning and developing and becoming a better version of you, hopefully. And we all have an end date eventually. But until that point, always set yourself the next thing, the next challenge, the next thing you want to learn, because it makes this whole journey that we call life so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, here's the thing for me. If you're the kind of person who starts from nothing special and gets yourself into a position where you've built up this asset base, you've put in the work, you've done this really difficult thing, and you've got yourself into the situation where you can retire early, you're almost by definition the kind of person who's not going to enjoy retirement in the sense of just sitting around doing nothing. To have achieved that, you need to have a work ethic and you need to have drive. So you're right, Rob, you achieve that first goal and then you almost need to set another goal. That's not the end, but it's like, well, right, what am I now going to do with the next phase of my life? It might not be around money, it might not be around work, although it might be around work in a different way. But you do need to have that goal, because sitting around on a beach or playing golf might be great for a month, it might be great for 6 months. But if you've got that personality type, you're going to get bored. So thank you to Mark. We really appreciate everything that he's done for the Property Hub over the years, and especially appreciate his time, and especially appreciate him sharing that story with us, because there are so many valuable lessons to take away. So it's been a busy episode, but we've just got time before we wrap for Hub Extra. It's that part of the show where we bring you something that's going to make your life that little bit better, whether it's a tool, a quote, an app, something that you can go away and use. And it's all backed up by the Hub Extra email that hits the inboxes of Property Hub members every Friday morning. This week, we've got something super basic, super quick, but super useful. The background to this is, as you might know, if you self-manage your properties, at the start of every tenancy, you have to issue all kinds of documents to your tenants, one of which is this How to Rent Guide, which is a government document that's pretty pointless, but you've got to issue it, and you've got to issue the current version. The trouble is, the government has a habit of updating this guide without telling anyone and making small tweaks all the time. So it can be really easy to accidentally give the wrong version, which can then cause trouble down the line if you need to go to court to get rid of the tenant. This resource is so simple. It automatically checks the government website once every hour to see if it's been updated. And if it has, you get an email. So it completely removes that risk and you don't have to think about it at all. I love little things like this that just make life easier. It's completely free and you'll find the link to check that out in this week's show notes. So that is us done for this week. We hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. Let us know what you took away from it and send your thanks to Mark via our social channels. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Property Hub UK. We've got another great episode lined up for you next Thursday, so make sure you join us for that one. And before then, we'll see you for Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. Until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.